I just needed to sleep for more than 3 or 4 hours at a time. So yeah, partly it's partly jet lag, but it's also partly yeah, there's a time difference.
Oh, it's jet lag, all right.
Yeah, I know, but it was mostly honestly, it was mostly the just the lack of sleep that I had had. So I will tell you, it's a long trip. John, I could tell you, John did sleep on the plane. He was snoring. I heard him. No, he wasn't. He wasn't.
How could you hear me over the jet engines?
We left at 1 a.m. We left at 1 a.m. I went to sleep. I went to sleep almost immediately and then got up after about 4 or 5 hours. No, it wasn't so bad on the way home. And landing it, by the way, at 6 o'clock in the morning, some of us got home. John, what time did you get home? Well, you had a stop on the way, but it was pretty quick, right?
Oh, we were home. It was the quickest yet. We were home 8:30, 8 o'clock. No,
we book our trip
8 o'clock.
Probably before 8.
Yeah, before 8 o'clock.
Customs takes literally now, if you have global entry, it takes 30 seconds. How long did it take you? No, honestly, I literally walked through.
Well, we were on the watch list, so it took us a little longer.
No, we were one of the first ones to go through customs on our flight.
Yeah.
We were at the very beginning of the line, and then it just built up after us.
And how long did it take you though?
Not long, 10 minutes.
Well, the longest it took people was about a half hour, and that just meant that the bags were by the time people got out. Also, it didn't take any time for the bags. I could have been home at 7:30. We had to wait for one of our passengers was in a wheelchair, so we had to wait for the wheelchair to come around. And other than that, I mean, we made 2 stops on the way home, and I was still home by 8:30. So it was not. I mean, we also came back on Yeah. What do you mean?
No, I haven't done anything.
Oh yeah. She had to go through. I don't know. Look, it was also President's Day that we got in, so there was no traffic.
Yeah, that helped.
There was no traffic, so that turned out to just be a fluke. I didn't plan it that way, but for those of us who got back on some people who didn't go to Jordan, maybe had a little bit more traffic from the airport, but anyways, it was a great trip. We got everybody back safe, and aside from a little bit of rain, I mean, not a little bit of rain, we had a lot of rain the first day, but then there was no more rain. So I would say overall it was very little bit of rain. When if you took the rain that we had the first day and made it go out over those 12 days, there was a little bit of rain. But that first day it rained, and it was very unusual actually for Israel, that it like rained all day, but it pretty much rained that whole first day, and that wasn't great. But then after that, then we were lucky. I mean, if we had 2 or 3 days like that with that kind of rain, it would have been miserable, but we had one day, and look, it was one of the worst rains, that I've ever been in Israel. But other than that, and the Schulmans were there, they got back, you guys got back safe. You're there. I see you guys. You had a good flight back, I assume. You had a great trip. It's great.
We did, and of course it was a great trip.
And it was great having the Schulmans there, who people see them online, but we got to be with them in person, and they're even better in live. They're even better live in person. They're better live in person, and it was great having them there, and it was really a blessing too, because unfortunately, as a lot of people know, Joyce got sick while she was there, and she made it through. Somehow she pushed her way through, but it was really great having them there, because she did need some help, and look, all I can tell you is people were at every step of the way, including on the way home. The flight attendants and everybody are like, how does this woman, have so much vitality and energy? And Yeah, they were amazed at every step, from the moment I was with her when we literally went through TSA customs in LA, and she impressed those people. So from in America and Israel, everywhere else, people were like, they were just again
How old
inspired
is
by
she?
her.
90?
We all are. So
Really?
yeah, we wish she was feeling better, but she is an inspiration. So
Yeah,
and
thanks Rabbi for watching out for Joyce.
yeah, no, it was look, I mean, what can I say? You just hope you have you hope you have that kind of energy and attitude at any stage of your life. And so I mean, look, it's my honor to be able to help make sure that she was comfortable, and sat up next to her on the plane ride. And look, I mean, she was battling through a bad cough, which, man, she made it. She made it through to Jordan. Anyways, so it's good to be back. We had a chance to study there. We didn't have a chance to do weekly Torah study, which would have been cool, but I don't think many people wanted to. Get up. Well, I mean, look, it was bad enough what we were doing to people, taking them through we really ran them through the ringer, but getting people up at 5 o'clock to study Torah in Israel would have been a little too much. So for the people who are here,
I
that,
agree.
I would have done it. I think I was up at
It
5
was
o'clock
already over
every day there.
anyway.
I don't think other passengers would have wanted to go down and study Torah at 5 o'clock in the morning, but who
I
knows?
think you're right.
Yeah.
We would have.
John will tell you, I mean, there was not many days that I wasn't up at 5 in the morning while I was there, mainly because I would go to bed at 8 or 9 there, and also, again, sleep until about 3. And, then I was just trying to figure out what to do there, because it was already after work time. I will tell you, if you can get on time and you're not exhausted and stuff like that, the good thing about going to Israel, and we noticed it this summer when Tracy and I were there, just more for fun, is that if you're not exhausted, and if you're not traveling all day, the good thing about going to Israel is you can go to Israel, have fun during the day, travel, do a little sightseeing, whatever, and then come back at 5 or 6 o'clock, and then even do 3 or 4 hours of work on West Coast time and actually be productive. I mean, if you think about that, if you go, I don't know, if you went on vacation, I'm not making a case for it, by the way. I don't want anyone to go, hey, he said you can go to Israel and play all day and work and get some work done. But if you have work to do, and you have, you can actually be somewhat productive on vacation. And again, some people are like, oh, that's not why you go on vacation. But if you
Yeah,
do
Ron
have
and
work
Don
to
want to
do,
go play at the
you can
beach or
actually make
something, so
deadlines and get work done, at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, and be completely productive. And people are like, aren't you on vacation or whatever? And you can actually get stuff done. So look, I'm not telling people to do that, but you can conceivably do that. And that's something you can't do in America. If you go on vacation in Hawaii or Florida or whatever, you can't also get some work done, because if you're at the beach from, whatever, or if you're at Disneyland, you can't do work at the same time, but you could conceivably do that. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not telling people to do that. I don't know if, I don't know, John, if you ended up doing that, but my guess is you probably had a few days where you were doing work in the evening and got stuff done. But
Yeah, I had to work all the time. It was no problem.
I mean, like I said, I'm not telling people to do that. I'm not saying, hey, that's the great thing about going to Israel, but it is kind of a neat feature of going there. And I guess the same thing can be said for going to Europe sometimes, but the time difference being 10 hours is even more so that you almost could have 2 fully productive days. But anyways, I don't want anybody to say that's the way to ruin the vacation, but you what?
And had unseasonable rain.
Oh, that's not good.
Yes, the airport was knee deep in water, and they couldn't fly out one day.
Well, the Kogans aren't here to defend themselves.
There's nothing to defend.
I know. I'm just kidding. I know.
They wound up meeting up with the ship and everything wound up okay, but they were lucky.
Yeah,
They
that's,
were lucky.
well, I will tell you that, that's always, whenever you have flights and those kinds of things, connections, and stuff like that.
And then once they
Or
got-
they did make it out or something.
Hogan's like,
didn't make one of the stops because it was so rough out of seas, because of the weather, so.
Talking about
It's good to know about that kind of stuff. Now, wait a second. I've had this up this whole time, and people are going to go like, wait, why is this up here on the Torah? Why is this piece up here on the Torah? What's this doing here? Well, I'll tell you this. A few weeks ago, the last time we had class, we finished with this really important part of Leviticus, which talks about not making gashes on your flesh or incising any marks on your body, which of course is a discussion we had about tattoos, body piercing. You did, but so Mike just said again, to some extent, when you have surgery, you're gashing your body. In some cases, you're
Even have it anymore or anything.
in some cases, yeah, you're doing it for health. But look, there is an argument that the whole discussion about having tattoos, which are definitely considered, again, marks on your flesh, is whether, okay, first of all, it says for the dead, which would seem to imply that if it's not, for the dead, what about that? Well, it does say incise any marks on yourself. And then the words, I am Adonai. Now, I will tell you, there are some people who say you're not supposed to incise any marks on yourself that say, I am Adonai. So as long as you didn't write on your body, I am God, that might be okay. I'm just telling you that's a way to read it. I don't read it that way. I think most people understand that that's not what it was supposed to be about, right? When it says Ani Adonai, that's when God kind of will say things like Ani Adonai, right? Ani Adonai, right here. I am Adonai. It's not part of this. It's a I'm God, which is what we have as a refrain here in the holiness code, which is over and over and over again. Don't do these things because God wants you to be holy. God's holy, you be holy. And so I'm just telling you, there are people who say, don't write on your body, I am Adonai, which of course would be not a nice thing to do because you're not God. You're part of God. You have God in you, but you're not God. So there are people who read it that way. But most people don't. Most people understand it that you don't make marks on your body for the dead or any marks on yourself in general. Okay, so that was the tattoos, the piercing. But what we didn't mention, and again, I only mention it because of what Mike said, which is really actually an important idea, which is, I guess I thought about it today because Madonna just posted about her plastic surgery. Isn't plastic surgery considered a form of incisions and marks on yourselves? Because unless you're having reconstructive plastic surgery, in most cases, plastic surgery is done for self-enhancement and for feeling better about your body. Now, is elective and completely cosmetic surgery for the sake of your aesthetic, is that a form of, violating this law? Now, most people today, most rabbis and most halakhic authorities would say that it's not, that doing plastic surgery, whether it's a nose job or whether it's, which I'll share a secret with you. There are many Jewish people who've had nose jobs. So I know. Don't be shocked by what I'm about to tell you. There are many Jews who had plastic surgery, especially rhinoplasty. But that being said, most people would say that plastic surgery for self-enhancement or for the aesthetic would be allowed because it's part of one's overall feeling about themselves. And therefore, it's really no different than putting on makeup or
You're right, Mike's right.
so, well,
Because you can tattoo.
I-
your eyebrows. You can do all of that. Feel better.
so the argument is the tough one, right? So once you allow, once you say, hey, what's the difference between the two? It becomes a very slippery slope, right? Now, the argument, I guess one of the things that people would say about tattoos, and again, you could say that this is splitting hairs and it's not necessarily a big difference between people feeling better about their bodies, is that oftentimes tattoos are more statements of your beliefs, or essentially, without being crass about it, kind of a billboard that you put on your own body, which means that it's not so much part of your aesthetic of your, it's not so much a part of your body as a statement almost outside of your body, which is, I'm making this statement about my beliefs, the people I care about, my favorite football team, my favorite actor or actress. And so then it becomes a statement, not a statement, not about so much yourself, but what you believe, and kind of almost outside of yourself, what piece of something else you want to put on yourself, which, by the way, I've seen it. Actually, I have a cousin who has a Jewish star about this big tattooed on his back.
Oh,
This big. He also happens to be a surfer and lives down in Orange County, where there are a whole lot of surf Nazis. And I think he put it on his back as much of a statement of his pride in Judaism as also as a statement to say, you know what, to the surf Nazis that are surfing right next to him. So I don't know, look, part of it is, again, this is a statement of his faith and his identity. But it is a statement outside of who he is, how he was born. But again, it's a slippery slope, and I don't want to.
Parents feel about that.
His parents, my aunt and uncle, my aunt and uncle chose to live in that community. My uncle is not Jewish, though he's always raised the kids Jewish and has always been identified with, always identified with Judaism. He doesn't have a tattoo himself, but he served in the Navy, and a lot of the people he served with had tattoos. And his, I don't.
Then you can't, I'm not asking that question of your uncle because he wasn't Jewish. What about your?
My aunt, I don't think she, has lived such an assimilated life. I think to some extent she probably wasn't. She might have culturally been somewhat uncomfortable when her child had the first tattoo, but I don't think that was his first tattoo. I'm almost positive that wasn't his first tattoo. So if that's not your first tattoo, by the time you get that tattoo, you're like, oh, well, at least he's having a Jewish star put on his back. So I don't know.
Your daughters do?
It's a good question, right? So if they had a Jewish tattoo, I would not be happy with it, and I would be, I guess if the tattoo was their name in Hebrew or had some Jewish identity on it, I'd be less upset about it than it would be if it was.
At all, like that.
I would not be happy with it. But we discussed this last time. I told you that's why I didn't even let them get their ears pierced until they were out of the house. Joanne, that's what I talked about last week. And I know because I went back and listened to it. The way we finished the last class was my discussion with my daughters, basically saying that's one of the reasons why, and they're not going to watch this tonight, so they're not going to hear this, but that's one of the reasons why I set that boundary with the ears pierced. Yes, and that's what, to some extent, that was all about. So look, I wanted them to get out of the range of being a teen or being a young 20-year-old and getting a tattoo without having them with it being a reflection only of where they are at that moment. Here's my argument, and I didn't use this argument last week about what I tell people who have tattoos. who are Jewish, which is, or considering, as I said, this. If you were a young person thinking about getting a tattoo when you're 20, 22 years old, I tell people this. This is an aesthetic decision that you're going to make. And again, I know you can get it removed, but if you're making an aesthetic decision when you're in your 20s, think about this. This is what I tell people. I believe this. Look at your parents' pictures when they're in their 20s. Look at their hairstyle. If you told your parents that the way they wear their hair in their 20s is the way they have to wear their hair for the rest of their lives, who needs that? Why make a decision on your aesthetic? Why make a decision on the way you present yourself or the way you look that has to be with you for the rest of your life? And that's what my argument is about tattoos, is that to make a decision about what you want to have on your body forever isn't a decision that anybody, and that this is a decision, by the way, outside to some extent, the main decision, which is that our bodies are a gift from God. And so if we look at our bodies as something that are a miracle and are a gift from God, and we treat them in such a way as we're not saying, hey, my body is a billboard for what I feel like at this moment. And so, God forbid, and you hear about it all the time, somebody has a tattoo of the person that they're married to, that they're in love with at that moment, and then they don't want to be with that person anymore. To me, that's like in a nutshell, the most ridiculous part of this, because when the person got the tattoo, 100%, they felt at that moment they were going to be with this person for the rest of their lives. Now, look, it's a different case because my cousin who has a huge tattoo of the Jewish star also has a tattoo on one side of his son and on one side of his daughter. Son and daughter will always be part of his life. He's always going to be proud of him. On the other hand, it's a picture of his son when his son was 5 years old, which is kind of weird because his son doesn't look anything like that today. But at that moment, he had that frozen in time. I get that. And again, that's a person who'll be with you forever. But, to me, again, our bodies are not like a billboard or like something that we can just say, hey, this is where I'm at this point. Because our bodies aren't that, and they change, and our bodies change, and our attitudes change. Why freeze it in time? That's my argument with why, to answer your question, Joanne, what I would tell my kids if they came to me and said, hey, or look, this is why I did what I did. I will tell you, I had an impulse when I was in my 20s to have a tattoo. One time, I didn't do it. What? No, it had nothing to do with sports. No, I'll tell you, in all seriousness, I had you're gonna, when I tell you what happened, you'll understand why. So I was in my 20s. It was before I was in rabbinical school, so I was in college, and I was in it was when I was in England, actually, and tattoos were just starting to get more popular at the time. And I had the impulse at the time, I was probably 20, 21, that I was going to get so I was going to get the number of a survivor that I was friends with, his number tattooed on my arm, because I knew he was going to be gone soon, and he actually lived about 4 or 5 years longer. But I was going to get his number tattooed on my arm so that when he was gone, someone would see it and I would explain it. So I talked to the person, and he said, absolutely do not do that. And so he said, it's not a number that I wanted to have, and you shouldn't do it. And so he talked me out of doing it, and I didn't do it. And so that was the only time, the impulse that I had to do it, and I didn't. And I'm glad I didn't. But
3 weeks ago till now, I found out my granddaughter.
Hello, can you hear me?
yeah.
Yeah, this is Sheldon. I'm at the gate outside.
Oh,
Could someone let me in?
all right. Hey, thanks, Sheldon. Sorry. That was really.
That's okay. The bus was late.
Okay, no worries. Thanks for letting us know, Sheldon. Anyways, so that was the tattoo story that I was going to share with you, and so I only bring that up because of that. And by the way, just so you know, since I had that impulse or desire to do
Hello?
that, yeah, she's coming out. Sheldon, she's out. So, just so you
What?
know.
The sprinklers are going off.
Hold it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. My bus was a half hour late, otherwise I would have been there when people got here. Okay.
Sorry,
Well,
everybody.
all right, I got these new waterproof shoes. So,
I'm trying to get this call off, but I can't. Okay, I got it now. Anyways, so it's interesting though, this impulse to have the number though. There were several people in the last 20 years who've done exactly that. They've had numbers of survivors tattooed on their body. So usually it's for a survivor that that people knew about, and it's almost like a statement of a statement of solidarity with that person. I will show you one of the people who did that.
Your skin moves,
Yeah,
it moves, and so.
I have a cousin, no, I don't have a cousin. Kenny has a cousin, my brother-in-law,
yeah.
that she's a tattoo artist,
Oh,
but she is tattooed from neck to toe.
good for her. Anyway, that's how I feel about it, but I mean, it moves though, so then you have to have it filled in and change things around a little, and then to have it taken off, it's painful.
So one of the people who has a tattoo of a number, a Holocaust number, is actually David Blaine, the magician, has Primo Levi's number, the survivor, Holocaust survivor, and later writer. So he has Primo Levi's number tattooed on him. He has other tattoos as well, but yeah. So that's like, I don't know. I must have heard about it, 30 years ago. But anyways, I didn't do it. And one of our tour guys in Israel, Shai, has his grandfather's number tattooed on him. He has other tattoos as well. And tattoos used to be very rare in Israel. Now they're very common. And Israelis, there's much more, you'll see them much more frequently now in Israel. You never used to see them. Up until about 20 years ago, very rare. And now it's very common. So with that, though, let's now read the next line, which is, do not degrade your daughter and make her a harlot, lest the land fall into harlotry and the land be filled with depravity. Now, or depravity. That seems like a no-brainer, right? That seems like, well, why would anyone do that? Well, clearly, all of these laws that we're reading, starting with the beginning, were cautionary laws to make sure the Israelites didn't become like the Canaanites. And for the land to become filled with depravity is also the indicator that we're talking about the behavior of the people who lived on that land before, the Canaanites. We'll see it a couple times where it actually will say, again, so you don't become like those people. So it means that it was culturally acceptable for Canaanites to have their daughters become a harlot. These were the words here, znotah or tizneh, which is the verb for zonah, for a prostitute, is more of the prostitution for the sake of economics, of essentially being a prostitute. There are other words and there's another Hebrew word, and there is indication in the Bible that there's also what we call cultic prostitution that was included in part of Canaanite and other cultures' worship at the time. So there was cultic prostitution, and the word that we have for that in Hebrew is a kadesha, which comes from the word kadosh, which is prostitution that was done in a sacred precinct or for the sake of gods or goddesses. That's not what the word here is for. This is harlotry, prostitution, street walking, that type of stuff, which is for the sake of money, which again could be used to support the family. It could be used to support the parents even, understand that prostitution within the Jewish community has always kind of been known and accepted to some extent, but also not encouraged. And so this was a big problem in the ancient world that the Jews had with their neighbors. And it was considered to be not acceptable for a father or a mother to turn their child into a prostitute, even if it's for the sake of supporting the family. Definitely, you can understand why people made, if there was not a cultural issue with it, why it would happen. Look, there are cultures and societies where prostitution is accepted and where families knowingly have their children engaged in prostitution for the sake of, economic survival, economic, for the stability of the family. It goes against definitely our sense of morality in America, in most of the West. We'd say that that's not acceptable. Look, there was a slippery slope where people would say, well, yeah, but fathers used to be able to marry off their daughters for the sake of the security of the family. Just watch Fiddler on the Roof. Tevye's approached with an offer, with a match, for his daughter with Laser Wolf, right? He's older, he's been married, and his daughter is supposed to be married off to this guy for the sake of the economic security of the family. That's the justification that is made for why this match should be made.
Yeah, but it doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen because he intervenes and convinces his wife that her aunt, right, Tanta, whatever, the nightmare, right? And this is why you can't let it happen. But it almost happened. It could have happened.
And puts his daughter into prostitution, then she wouldn't be able to be married.
So the short term, yes, the short term situation of allowing her to be a prostitute would again help the family, maybe for the short term and maybe even long term if she was going to continue to be a prostitute. But yes, it would take away for her value as a bride. But people would look at it as a trade-off, and there are people who would have said, I can't wait for her to, if she gets married and whatever. But look, it wasn't allowed. By the Torah's law, this was not allowed. It must have been happening, and it was happening from the standpoint of the culture at the time. Look, you can see the stories about it. There was a trade of Jewish girls to South America that went on in the turn of the last century, in the 1900s. To some extent, it happened a little bit into the United States, but for the most part, it was the United States didn't tolerate it, and the U.S. Jewish community didn't tolerate it. But in Argentina, it went on, and it went on for a good 20, 30 years. Essentially the slave trade, but families sending daughters over to South America to get them out of pogroms, and basically from one really bad situation into not a very good situation in South America. So there have been articles, and I think even a movie or two, documentary made about the slave trade of Jewish girls to Argentina in the early 1900s. It's people knew it was wrong. People, probably justified it because they were getting them out of, pogroms and horrible situations in Anatevka style situations. But, Yeah, it was bad, and it's a horrible legacy. And you know, there were women who literally never could get married, and basically had that stigma of prostitution, you know, for years in Buenos Aires. But you know, Israel's had an interesting situation. Just came back from Israel. You know, Israel for a Western country has very little, I think, at least, open open situations of prostitution and sex work for a Western country. So United States definitely has kind of strange rules when it comes to that. I mean, look, we have legalized prostitution really only in one state, which is Nevada. And for that, again, not even in the whole state. But in Israel, prostitution actually is not illegal. What is illegal is pimping and making money off of a prostitute as a manager, if you will. And so Israel has been pretty strict about that. Israel does not have a lot of again, open open prostitution or, you know, red light districts and things like that, which you'll find in many parts of Europe. You know, in major cities, you'll find that to be accepted. Amsterdam, but it's not just Amsterdam. You know, Berlin, you know, other parts, you know, of former Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact countries. You know, whether it's Poland or Czech Republic, those kinds of places, Hungary. And so Israel is actually kind of unique in that sense, in that situation where it kind of takes into consideration this kind of law, which is, you know, Israel doesn't want to see women put in that situation. Look, there are people who said when Israel will be a normal country when it has, you know, Jewish janitors and Jewish prostitutes and all the things that people go, well, Jewish people don't do that. Well, they do. They have, and that's just part of life. But to have a Jewish country where people are doing everything, including those things that are not what you necessarily, and again, I don't want to say janitors but jobs that people said, hey, aren't all Jews doctors and lawyers? No, they're not, and they never have been. And again, the jobs that are you know, in some cases on the fringes of society, people said, well, you know, in Israel, you're going to have that. That being said, how did Israel get around that? For much of the last 30 years, there's been a terrible use of essentially Israeli immigration law and loopholes thereof in bringing women up from the former Soviet Union and from Warsaw Pact countries over as sex workers in clubs that were essentially run by the Russian Jewish mafia. And Israel's cracked down on it, and it's definitely something that they were not proud of and were vigilant on, but it hasn't been uprooted. And but every time I've been there in the last 10, 15 years, it's gotten better. They were in the mid 90s, early 2000s. I think Israel had a decision whether they're going to sanction this or whether they're going to crack down on it and stop it from happening. And for the most part, I think they were pretty vigilant in not allowing it to happen. And so they went a different direction, which is, again, trying to protect the women and trying to make sure that even if it's not against the law for a woman to be a prostitute, they're not going to have a situation where they're going to have women that are essentially in slavery, in a form of slavery. So again, I don't know exactly where Israel is on rankings for these kinds of things, but that's where Israel is today. And again, a lot of it has to do with economics. A lot of it has to do with cultural norms. A lot of it has to do with immigration, even. And so these are interrelated issues when it comes to, and again, everyone says, well, it's the world's oldest profession, but it's also, prostitution has also oftentimes been a way for women to essentially be slaves. And so it's not acceptable to just say, well, it's, it's the world's oldest profession. It'll always be here. That's not an answer that takes into consideration at all the safety and the protection that a society owes towards, owes to women. So that being said, there is not a lot in the Torah about it. The Torah definitely doesn't say that prostitution is illegal. There are clearly stories that we read about in Genesis where Judah visits Tamar thinking that she's a prostitute. There's no judgment made on that decision per se. There are lines in the Talmud that talk about prostitution. I think there is just an understanding that, yeah, there are consequences though. There are costs for this, for a society. And one of them is that your daughter cannot, essentially be forced into prostitution. Any questions, comments? That's one law. So you shall keep my Sabbaths and venerate my sanctuary. I'm Adonai. There's that phrase again. I'm Adonai. Seems pretty straightforward. We read about keeping Shabbat in the Ten Commandments. So these are some of the we'll see some of the laws in the holiness code here in Leviticus are restatements of the Ten Commandments, but they're still here. And again, were people thinking that you're going to read the Ten Commandments as well? I would think so, possibly, but whoever wrote this or however this was passed down to us, and again, this is in Leviticus, this was another set of laws. This is another code. Next one, do not turn to ghosts. Do not inquire of familiar spirits to be defiled by them. Again, I am your God. Ani Adonai Elohechem, which is a little different than Ani Adonai, but this says Ani Adonai Elohechem. I am your God. I guess you can make the argument that's a reminder that if you start worshiping ghosts and spirits, that you're actually not worshiping God anymore. These are all I am God, and this one's I am your God, as if to say these are not your gods. The ghosts and spirits are not your gods. All I can tell you, we already said it. Mike just said it. The reason it's here, people did it. People still do it. We understand why people do it. We understand the desire, why people want to contact spirits. I'm laughing because I'm laughing because there are people who feel that contacting or talking to family members and creating a situation where you're communicating with the next world when it's your family might be different than what this is, which is talking to spirits that are venerated or trapped in objects that are essentially used as well, let's put it this way. Spirits that would be used by lots of people, so that someone would go inquire of a spirit that they knew was in an area that wasn't necessarily your family member, in the sense that they were like, well, you talk to that ghost, and that ghost was not your cousin or your parent, but a ghost that everybody knew was the ghost or spirit of that place, which is why it's sometimes, separated. Here it seems like it's any kind of spirit, any kind of ghost. So we know that in the time of Saul, right, King Saul, is that he went around and tried to get rid of all these necromancers, they're called, people who bring up spirits. And then of course what happens to him, right, is he wants to talk to Samuel, his prophet, his mentor. And so he goes to the last witch around, the witch of Endor, and says, bring up, I'm going to tell you who to bring up. And she brings up Samuel, and she realizes that this is Saul who did it. And she feels like she's being trapped. And Saul basically says, it's okay. You're not going to get punished. Just bring up Samuel. And Samuel's brought up. And so, he's not happy. Samuel tells him, you're going to die tomorrow, anyways, God's done with you. But he definitely incurred Samuel's wrath even more by contacting the dead and going against this. So the irony, of course, is that it seems like Saul is very vigilant, and King Saul in implementing this law, and then he goes against it. Again, we don't know how thorough and how dedicated all the kings were in the history of Judah and Israel in getting rid of necromancers. It seems like some of them, again, consulted necromancers and were doing exactly the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. But we do know that it was popular, and we do know that it's still popular. But the idea of people regularly consulting spirits for information is not normal, in the sense that people don't go around telling people or bragging about the fact that they talk to spirits regularly and get information from them. The movie Ghost, yeah. And there seems to be this idea and it is to some extent in Ghost and other movies, that spirits don't want to really be trapped here anyways. So if you're causing a spirit to be bothered in this world, which is definitely what Samuel seems to be saying when Saul calls him up, I don't want to be here. Then it's not fair to the spirit world either, in that you're trapping those spirits and you're making them kind of come into this world, which is not something that's fair to them either, whatever that means. So there is a definite feeling in the Bible, including all the way back here to Leviticus, don't do it. I will say that the Bible never says it doesn't work. On the contrary, if Samuel is brought back from the dead, then it did work. So lest anyone say, well, it's all garbage. That's not what the Bible says. It just says you're not supposed to do it. So if anyone goes, well, the Bible looks down on it, it's stupid, it doesn't work, that's not actually what the Bible says. But that being said, it's considered a dark art, and it's one of the reasons why witches were killed during the Middle Ages and all the way up till, as you know, witch trials that went on in this country. So contacting spirits was something that you were not supposed to do from the biblical side, including, again, something that Christianity also took away from Judaism, which is that this is not something we're supposed to do. I don't know what to tell you other than this is what the Bible says when it comes to this. And again, one can make the argument, why? Because it takes away from worship of God. If we turn to spirits for the answers, are we really then leaning on and putting our faith in God?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, what if you dream about somebody who's passed away and the dream is very, very vivid? Do you believe that?
Well, it's interesting you say that. So if people have dreams, and I've had dreams where people who've died have talked to me, one can make the argument that if a spirit comes to you and talks to you, that's different than you searching after and going to that, because it doesn't say don't talk to a spirit. I guess it couldn't say that, but it says don't turn after them, don't inquire of them, and that don't search them. So, and I would add to that, don't bug them, because there is this idea that you do get in the Bible, which is that spirits don't want to be brought back into this world. That's fair. Now, if they come and visit you in this world, then that might be different.
What?
Can everyone hear Mike's dream? Okay, here, Mike, go for it.
Your stage, Mike.
Yeah.
I had this dream right after my aunt passed away. I didn't know she passed away. And
I was listening, I was sleeping, and all I heard all night was, Mikey, wait for my phone call. All night long. She had passed away. I knew she had passed away. And I woke up and I had my own phone. My phone rang. No one heard it but me. I picked it up. All I heard was static, and in the background, someone calling my name.
Wow.
So with that visitation,
I tell you what it meant.
what did it mean?
I was having a hard time. The first time someone close to me, that was my early 20s. And I felt that was her saying, move on.
Okay. Well,
It came to me.
so
I
if
believe it.
so, if somebody comes to you and again gives you information that helps you, that might be seen as different than
Yeah, absolutely.
bugging them.
Bug me.
What's your Mary, what does your King James say?
Okay, it's different. Regard not them that have familiar spirits, neither seek after wizards to be defiled by them.
That's an interesting translation. That's much different, but it also kind of gets to one of the things that they might be talking about here, which is again, people or objects or places or things that get inhabited by a spirit that people come and talk to. It's different from the kind of ghost stories or the ghosts that we're familiar with in the West, but there are cultures that say that certain places or certain people are inhabited by or be possessed by spirits. So this is along those lines of what the Bible's probably, again, talking about, which is why the King James Version says that. Actually saying that it's a wizard, that's probably not the best translation of it, but this word is sometimes used for Yedonim, are sometimes used for the wizard, and then Avot are the are used for the ghosts. So again, it's not so much a wizard as it is that kind of has a connotation of Harry Potter. Now, a necromancer would be a better term, because a necromancer literally is someone who just deals in the dead and spirits. So necromancy is using spirits or the dead to do magic. So wizardry, it has more of an implication of other types of magic as well. Though in the Harry Potter stories, part of what he does is contacting spirits and bringing up spirits and ghosts as well. But yeah, what we're talking about here probably is a little closer to what the King James says, which is places that and people that are possessed and have a spirit with them. So, it seems as though in the story where the Witch of Endor story, that when the witch is talking to King Saul, that to some extent Samuel inhabits and talks through her, and uses her kind of to use the ghost thing as like, Whoopi Goldberg going into her body. But there is that understanding that that's how ghosts manifest themselves in the world, is using somebody else as a vehicle, as a voice. So that is something that, again, we have little snippets of it, but maybe in the ancient Israelite culture, that was really more of what it was seen as, a person who brings forward those spirits. So that further goes along the lines of if a spirit would come and talk to you, that's different than you going to a wizard who literally gets inhabited by the spirit and then talks to you, which, by the way, is also, again, maybe disturbing the spirits, but also to some extent putting wealth and money in someone's hands for doing that, which again goes against Jewish tradition. We do understand, by the way, and this is where people kind of It's been kind of twisted in the modern world with some of the movies that have come out lately. But the concept of a Dybbuk is actually now in some of the movies, it's that it's a demon that possesses a person as a Dybbuk. It really wasn't supposed to. It was, I mean, not supposed to. The real meaning of a Dybbuk was that a spirit possessed you, and that a ghost of someone who lived before would inhabit and take a free ride on somebody for a while, and be a part of you. Now, it was not something you wanted. You didn't want someone to inhabit, or you didn't want another entity or another identity in you. Let me make it clear. It wasn't a good thing to have a Dybbuk, but it was different than being possessed as a demon, with a demon coming into you. That's where it is in some of the movies and some of the references to Dybbuks today. But originally it was, well, not originally, but the word and the understanding of a Dybbuk is literally something that becomes attached to you, like a possession, but more in Judaism and kind of Jewish superstition was more a spirit that rode with you for a while, and used your body as a vehicle. But
Like Joe Black.
like Joe Black, yeah, meet Joe Black. But there's that had a lot of Jewish elements in it. But this idea of a spirit that can talk through you, or more importantly, experience things that you can experience. So some of the earliest versions of the Dybbuk stories that were turned into movies and into literature in America, the Yiddish versions of Dybbuks, were that essentially like somebody who never got married before in their life could come and inhabit your body and experience what it's like to be in love and to be married, if they missed that experience in a previous existence. So it's not exactly reincarnation, but it's kind of like your reincarnation, in that a person would get to experience that. The idea would be that, again, once they experience that, they could leave. Once they had that feeling, that they could. It's kind of nice in the sense that it answers the question of like, what if somebody didn't get to have, a relationship like that? They could experience what love is like. It's a nice thing. Of course, the challenge is what if the Dybbuk is of the different gender? So that was when some of the literature that's the problem. It's not the right gender, right? This is, by the way, in some of Isaac Bashevis Zinger's stories. I mentioned this when we were on our Israel trip, when we were in Sfat, because Sfat is the city of mysticism, and where a lot of the Kabbalistic and later on kind of the Jewish superstitions of these kinds of things developed. But it kind of answers that question of like, it doesn't seem fair that people didn't get to have a kid, or they didn't get to have love. And so is there a way for them to experience that? And like the Dybbuk in one level allows for that to have, for people to have something like that, and not for their spirit at least to have experienced that in this world. So it's kind of like, on one hand, like a nice way of giving people hope that there's a way for people to do that. If they never had love, that they could have love. Look, in my mind, some of those Dybbuk stories existed because people had to have some kind of explanation for multiple personality disorder.
You really think that's what it was?
Yeah. So I think some of it, people just couldn't explain it. They just couldn't explain how people had, these kind of disassociative experiences where, wow, it seems like that's a whole different person that's inhabited that person. And I think that helped. I think it also helped, by the way, with people who had gender identity issues, where they just felt like they were a man trapped in a woman's body, or vice versa. And I think Dybbuk, saying that person was inhabited by a Dybbuk was a really kind of efficient way of answering that, in a way that allowed people to feel like there's some, I have some answer for this. There's some explanation for why I'm feeling the way I am. And if somebody said to you, well, it's because you have a Dybbuk, you're possessed by a spirit from somebody who lived before. It's an answer. It's a way of answering what I can only imagine are feelings that people have had since the beginning of time. And now you have a way of explaining it. So you can say it's silly, you can say it's stupid, you can say it's superstitious, but maybe for people, it helped them understand who they were and gave them a sense that this wasn't abnormal. I mean, it's not what happens to everybody, but it's possible. And it's possible, it possibly gave them some comfort. So I don't know. That's the story of Dybbuk's. You didn't have to ask for one. It's not like you had to say, hey, I'd like to have a Dybbuk, or I'd like to consult a spirit. So for those who've had visitations, or for those people who felt like they've talked to a spirit before, that's one thing. Sometimes it gets a whole nother level. And that's why people would say, oh, that person has ghosts, or that person is inhabited, is a home for spirits. Hey, if you could have one, you could have 20. So maybe there were people who felt that that's what they did, or explained why somebody could be. What's the translation again, Mary? No, the other one. Yeah, but what was it? What was the word before that?
Regard not them
That have.
that have.
Yeah, so that they have familiar spirits, right? So having a familiar spirit means that spirit was inside of them. They had it. It's not that they talk to a familiar spirit, but they have a familiar spirit. All right, there you go. That's a little bit about ghosts and spirits. This one is pretty straightforward. I don't know that we need to have, again, a whole lot of explanation about this, because everybody seems to understand this. You shall rise before the aged and show deference to the old. You shall fear God. I am Adonai. Again, this phrase, I am Adonai.
But we live in a culture that pushes truth.
Sheldon just made a good point. We don't seem to live like that today anymore. That is definitely true. We don't live in a culture that has recognition for those who have more experience. Here, showing respect for those that are older is definitely assumed by this fact that you rise before them, right? You stand up before them, and you specifically show deference to them, which means that you give them the benefit of the doubt and you show them respect simply because of their age. Now, people would say that today, that's ridiculous, right? So I guess there is something to be said by that. This is a Jewish value. So when we talk about what Jewish values are, this is a Jewish value. We understand that people who are older have achieved a certain level of wisdom and a certain level of experience. It doesn't mean that everything they say is 100% true. It also doesn't mean that they're always right, but we also give them we give them deference. That we assume that it's there. It may not always be there, it can be wrong, but we err on the side of giving them that. In the worst case scenario, all we've done is showed people respect, which to me is not such a bad trade-off. Because in the worst situation, all you've done is showed extra respect for somebody who's older than you. And it's always good to show respect to everybody. So what have you lost? But yes, the idea is that we do show deference. We do have a sense of erring on the side of paying attention to those who are older than us.
This translation says honor.
Yeah, the word that they're translating this, the word hadarta. I think I actually like the word deference better than honor. There is a totally different word, kavod, is honor, respect. This does have a sense of, to me, the word hadarta. Does anyone have a different translation in their homes in their home Bible in front of them for this word in 32? Anybody else have any other translations? Anybody?
Can you hear me?
Yep,
Is that verse 32?
yep.
Rise in the presence of the aged, show respect for the elderly, and revere your God. I am the Lord.
Yeah. I've got in this translation, which is pretty much the same as that one anyways, usually, is deference. Yeah, I think deference or even yeah, I think it's more than honor. I think it's basically saying, hey, that's, I don't want to say it this way, but it's kind of almost like saying we prefer the older people. I mean, that's what deference to me seems to be saying. So it's like this. If two people come to you and one of them is 25-year-old telling you something, and one of them is a 75-year-old telling them something, you take the 75-year-old's word for it. That's deferring to them. That's what I mean, that's to me, that's what the word in Hebrew has more of a connotation of, which is deferring, is basically saying, yeah, if I have two choices, I'm going to show the preference or I'm going to err on that side.
I'm gonna relinquish the honor to the elder.
Yeah, and I'm going to say, hey, they probably have some information that maybe the younger person doesn't have. So the other word is clearly rise before. Anyways, yeah. All right. So this one also, well, these two lines kind of go together. When strangers reside with you in your land, you shall not wrong them. The strangers who reside with you shall be to you as your citizens. You shall love each one as yourself, which again is ve'ahavta lo kamocha, just like ve'ahavta re'echa kamocha. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am Adonai your God. So we had just a few verses ago, ve'ahavta re'echa kamocha, love your kinsmen as yourself. And here it says you're supposed to love the strangers, the ger, who's with you. You're supposed to love them as well, like your citizens. So lest you say before, like, how are we translating? We talked about this when we read ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, whether it should be kinsman, your brother, your neighbor, your fellow. How are you going to translate re'echa? In the end, it doesn't really matter, because if you're supposed to love your kinsman and your citizen or whatever, your fellow country person like yourself, you're also supposed to worship. You're also supposed to show deference and love to the person who's not a citizen in your country. So this is a very interesting law, because again, when you take into consideration with the other one, pretty much opens up to everybody in your midst. You're supposed to love them as yourself. Here, there's actually a reason given for it, which is that you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So you know what it's like to be on that side of the situation. You know what it's like to be to not be a citizen, to not have that feeling of being at home. And so this is a really important law, which we need to be reminded of in our country, because again, when we talk about what rights and what we're going to do with people who are not citizens in our country, we have to consider what the Bible says about it, what our values are as Jews. So one can make the argument, and I will tell you it's what I believe, because look, you could say you know what it's like to be in Egypt as an immigrant, as a stranger, but I can also say you know what it's like to get off the boat in Ellis Island and live on the Lower East Side, and know what it's like to be an immigrant and live in a slum too, live in a tenement. So we know what it's like to be on the other side of this. So the question then is, okay, but what's happening in our country with immigration. Is there a limit to how many immigrants we can have, et cetera? Those are valid discussions. Those are valid points. Those are questions that our country essentially has to come to terms with, because every state has this issue, you know, of immigration. And then there's the wider issue of what it means for our country, because once you're in our country, you can pretty much go anywhere you want. You don't have to show a passport to cross from one state to another. So if somebody can come into one state, they can go into any other state. So it's not just a regional issue. It's not a state issue. It's a national issue. That's fair. Those are all legitimate discussions and points. I will tell you this. It's the Torah's belief, and I think the Torah is dead on this. If people live in your community and they work in your community and they take care of oftentimes jobs that nobody else wants to do, you have an obligation to take care of them and to give them the same rights that everyone else has. Once they're here, once they're working, once they're paying taxes, and once they're living amongst you, we have an obligation not to take advantage of. And that's what the Torah, I think, is saying here. Again, does that mean that everybody, you know, who crosses the border should be able to have that? Not necessarily. If we say, hey, look, we can't accommodate, the amount of people that we have coming here, then we have to say we can't have an open border. But once they're here, and once they're working, and once they're part of your society, once they're integrated in your society, we can't treat them differently. We can't say, well, we don't have to give them rights because they're not citizens. And that's what the Torah is saying. So I think that we'll see this here. We see it in other places in the Torah where it'll say, you shall have one law for everyone who lives amongst you, for the citizen and for the stranger who lives amongst you. So that's a very important idea. Now, I will tell you, all that being said, that also means that we probably have to have very deep discussions about what are the basic rights and what are the basic social safety nets that every citizen has, because if every citizen has it, then every non-citizen that lives amongst us has to have it too. So I think that's a fair discussion to have. I think it's a fair discussion that we should have as a nation, not as a state, not as a region, but as a nation. What are the rights and what are the protections and what are the benefits of being a citizen? And by that matter, for the people who are in the process of either obtaining citizenship or living here as essentially quasi-citizens, as strangers who are amongst us. Interestingly, today in Hebrew, this word ger does not mean an alien. It does not mean a non-citizen, which is the way it's used in the Bible. You can call it stranger. What does the Bible that you have in front of you, Mary, say? Stranger? Yeah. So the word ger is obviously oftentimes translated as alien or as stranger.
Used again when somebody leaves, like Hasidic, and then comes back.
That's called a Baal Teshuvah. That's a Baal Teshuvah.
Yeah.
But a ger is a convert. So today in Hebrew, we use the word ger as the word for a translate, as a convert. The translation is, or the connotation in Hebrew today isn't one of a non-citizen, but of a convert. A ger, the status of a ger is only seen from a religious standpoint in Judaism today. It's the word. I guess that to some extent is also indicative of the fact that once Jews lost any sense of nation or autonomy where they could decide, hey, this person's a citizen of our community or not, there was no national identity of a ger versus a citizen in Ezrach. And that's the Ezrach is a person who lives in your community, your citizen, who's accorded all the rights of being an Israelite, and a ger. Once there's no longer a polity, a government, a Jewish government, who's going to confer citizenship on that person anyways? So it's no longer citizenship, it's being part of the Jewish people religiously, which is why a ger now is a person who is a convert. It's now an issue in Israel. Israel does have immigration issues, and they are trying to come to terms with some issues that they have in Israel when it comes to immigration, and especially from people who are not Jewish. They've had a lot of immigrants come over from Africa in the last 20 years. And the issue that Israel's trying to figure out is, how do we deal with workers who are here, in some cases illegally, and what do we do with that? Israel has very tight borders. So for the most part, these are people that are sneaking over from the Sinai desert. They're coming over, they're being smuggled over along the Sinai. Israel has tightened up that border significantly, mainly for security reasons. So that it's not as easy for immigrants to come over from Africa. More likely, again, Israel would have issues with people who are on extended visas and who are staying in the country illegally on a visa. It's not as common, but it's not like America where people can kind of come over whenever they want. Israel does have a guest worker program, which is very effective, and Israel uses it especially now for agriculture. They have a lot of workers that come over from Thailand and the Philippines to work in the agricultural sector. Those jobs used to be done by Palestinians, but once the borders got kind of sealed off with Palestinians after the Intifada, Israel found it more effective to bring over guest workers from Asia. And so now there's a lot of guest workers that work in Israeli farms cultivating fruit and stuff like that from Thailand. And they're over on year-long visas. Sometimes they want to stay longer, but it's not easy, and it's not encouraged.
It isn't here either.
What?
If you come over on a certain type of visa from, let's say, Europe, okay? And if you come over, sometimes you can't get it reversed, you have to go back and then get permission to come back for a different way.
Yeah, no, it's not easy, and it's very hard actually to become a legal worker in America, through the normal channels. Look, my wife tried to do it. It was not easy. It was not an easy thing to do. So we have not. We're kind of a little discombobulated when it comes to our immigration policies. So I don't know. I don't have an easy answer for it, and I'm not steeped in the nuances of it today. But we definitely don't have it down yet. And as people who are sometimes blocked from immigrating to this country, I'm hesitant to definitely block people from countries that people are fleeing for their lives, because that's what a lot of our ancestors came here for. They couldn't get out, and of course, when Israel was controlled by the British, and when Roosevelt was president of the United States, people couldn't come to this country to survive. So thousands and thousands, and in the end, millions of Jews died in Europe because they couldn't come here. They couldn't come to Israel. All right. So continuing on, these are some restatements of things that we read last week, or last time, a couple weeks ago. You shall not falsify measures of length, weight, or capacity. You shall have an honest balance, honest weights, an honest ephah, an honest hin. I, Adonai, am your God who freed you from the land of Egypt. So this is an interesting reminder. Again, we just read it before. You're strangers in the land of Egypt. There's things that we take away from Egypt. This one seems weird. Like, why would this have to come from Egypt? Well, obviously because we were slaves in Egypt as well. And one of the things that the Egyptians did to us was they forced us to work for free. And in some cases, of course, as we know, not only did we have to do the work, but we had to provide our own stuff for the work. That's what we talk about at Passover. The fact that originally Pharaoh told us we had a certain amount of bricks we had to build with every day, and then we had to provide the straw, for those bricks. So it got even worse. So all of these things have to do with the way we do business and the way we hopefully create a situation for people that they know what they are buying, and what they are, when they go to the store, they know that the weight on the product is what it's supposed to be. They know when they're getting gas from a fuel pump that it's how much they paid for. There are people that our government hires to go around and make sure that those gas pumps are pumping out the right amount of gas. Because guess what? People play around with that and they get caught. So that's why you see those stickers on the fuel pumps that say, this is the last time that somebody came by to check the pump. So these are important responsibilities for society. People will not follow the rules if they can get away with it. And that's why it's not up to us to say, oh, yeah, that person will give us the right weight. The authority for the enforcement of this comes from God himself or herself. God says, you got to do it. This is literally these are commandments. This isn't, well, it's good for your society to do this. God is commanding it, and God is holding us accountable to do it. So that when we don't do it, it's not just we're breaking the law, we're breaking God's law. Look at the word that we use for this, right? The word for honest weights, honest ephah, honest measurements, right? You can see the word in Hebrew, tzedek. Now you know that word is righteousness, but we also know that word is the root for the word, tzedakah, but it's also justice. This is justice. When we say tzedakah is not just about, giving charity to somebody. That's not really what the Hebrew word is. It is righteousness, and it's honesty. It's justice. It's leveling the scales. It's basically saying, this is how we make sure that things aren't out of whack, out of balance. And I think it's interesting that this is the word we use for righteousness. So when we give charity, we're not doing it because we care to do it. That's the Latin for caritas. That's the word for charity, for deciding you want to do something nice. In Hebrew, it's not a matter of deciding to do something nice. It's because that's what we're supposed to do. That's the honest thing to do. It's the just thing to do. And that's what the word tzedek is in Hebrew. And the last line in chapter 19, Ushmartem et kol chukotai. You shall faithfully observe all my laws and all my rules. I am Adonai. So that's the end of chapter 20, which is again a list of laws and rules. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that those laws don't end in chapter 20, but something, again, along the lines of a code, of a list of laws, just got laid down. Now, there are more laws, and we're going to spend the rest of this time tonight together looking at some of these other laws that we find in chapter 20. I don't know how many of these laws we'll get through to. There's another one that we discussed we might see today. If we don't see it today, see it next week. And next week we will be in person. Tuesdays we're not in person, but Wednesdays we will be in person. Folks, let's take a look at this first part. This first part is, well, this one may not be as relevant as some of the other laws that we have. So Adonai spoke to Moses, say further to the Israelite people, anyone among the Israelites or among the strangers residing in Israel who gives any offspring to Molech shall be put to death, and the people of the land shall pelt that person with stones. And I will set my face against that party, whom I will cut off from among the people for having given offspring to Molech, and so defile my sanctuary and my holy name. And if the people of the land shall shut their eyes to that party like giving offspring to Molech, and should not put that person to death, I myself will set my face against the party's kin as well, and I will cut off from among the people both that person and all who follow in going astray after Molech. Now, what is all this business about Molech all about? Well, first of all, the word Molech, as you can see, is the Hebrew word Allah, right? King. Now, Molech, clearly the root of it is king, just like the word Baal, the other god of the Canaanites, means Lord. Actually, the word Baal in Hebrew is husband today. Baal. You know the word Baal from Baal Habayit. Baal Abusta is the master of the house, which is usually the mother of the house. But Baal Habayit literally means the master of the house. So a Molech, the Molech god, the god that is referred to here, is literally comes from the same root as king. But Molech, and we don't know a lot about the worship of Molech, we really know about it from the Torah. This is something that, again, let's see if I'll bring up a picture of it. This god that the Bible talks about is probably some kind of idol that required human sacrifice. Now, not every reference of Baal has human sacrifice in it. Just about every reference of Molech, not every one, but virtually every reference of it is giving offspring to Molech.
Would be child sacrifice.
Yeah. And so this is very reprehensible, which is why the law on it is so strong. So you have to kill the people who are worshiping Molech. And if you don't do it, then you're going to be subject to the death penalty as well. So uprooting this worship of Molech was very, very important. We don't know a lot about it. We do know that the Canaanites, or again, the Phoenician child sacrifice rituals went on. So from what we understand culturally, the Phoenicians were Canaanite peoples. They were Canaanites who lived in modern day Lebanon. But what was so weird about the Canaanites in Lebanon, the Phoenicians, is that they ended up traveling all around the world. They established, well, not the world, but all around the Mediterranean, the known world at that time. They went far, the Phoenicians. These Canaanites went all around the Mediterranean, and everywhere they established colonies, we found altars where they performed child sacrifice. So it was an important part of their cult. It was important part of their rituals. The Canaanites were the majority of the land of Israel at one point. They had a cultural impact on the region. As we know from the Bible, the Israelites were not able to completely uproot them. There were Canaanites that were living there the whole time. There were the Phoenicians were living in Lebanon the whole time. It says that King Solomon had relations with the Phoenicians. King Hiram was his partner, and they built things together and they worked together. There are stories of people who were part Phoenician, part Israelite. It seems like they were pretty well known, pretty well respected, the Phoenicians. Even though, again, the Canaanites were oftentimes condemned, it could be because those were the local Canaanites. No matter what, this worship of Molech and child sacrifice was very common. And we found it in Carthage, which was one of the big Phoenician colonies. Again, Carthage ended up going to war with Rome during the Punic Wars. These guys were practicing child sacrifice for 1,000 years until they were destroyed, and the Phoenicians kind of merged with all the other local peoples that they lived amongst. But I mean, according to our Bible, this is just abhorrent. The child sacrifice that they were practicing was completely abhorrent. And so we had to uproot it. It was hard to uproot. We've talked about it before. Their practice of child sacrifice was not without a logic to it, which was, hey, if you have over 50% of your infants dying at infant mortality anyways, what's sacrificing one to God so that all the rest of them are protected makes a lot of sense. Only from the standpoint of,
If it's not yours.
well,
Yeah, well.
I look, here's the logic. I sacrifice one child and 7 more get to live.
That's Sophie's choice.
It's not Sophie's choice. It's crazy choice. It's not, I can let one kid live or they're both going to die. That's a horrible choice. This is based on the fact that the people willingly believed that if we offered, and I did it the right way with the right intention, with the right willingness to Molech, that all my other kids would be born alive. I mean, if you don't know why your kids are dying and you have, if you're RH, if you're having, like, you don't understand why it's happening. You don't understand anything about blood type and RH factor. Babies are dying and you're just like, how are all the babies dying? They look like they're going to be healthy. Well, they're never going to live. I can't imagine how hard it was for people who didn't understand the medicine that we have today. So we've almost completely obliterated most of the diseases that killed babies. But when the infant mortality rate was so high, how do you not at least understand what these people thought they were doing? I mean, it's crazy. Now we can say that, but you can understand why people tried everything they could to try to keep their kids from dying. So that's the logic. And that's why people did it. I don't know. You hope one day that people don't look back on us and say, they were stupid. Look how little they knew. I don't know. I hope there are people 1,000 years from now, and I hope they don't look back at us like we're completely idiots, but maybe they will. They might. What if they know things in the future that we don't? I mean, look, it's safe to say that there's going to be stuff that they'll know in the future that'll make us look stupid.
Well, hopefully in a way there will be, because hopefully we'll be more intelligent.
Yeah. But what if the information that they have is so like this? We read this today and we go, yeah, this is terrible. They killed babies. Right? But what if one day people look back on us and say, can you believe how horrible these people were? Right? I don't know. I mean, who knows? Like, I just give you one that came across my mind just now as I said that. What if, put it out there, like, we don't know what people will know in the future, but let's just postulate what they could possibly know. Let's say they know so much that they understand something about like a soul or spirit. They understand that there really is a soul or spirit, right? Well, let's say they understand that. They can see it, or they can feel it, or they can manifest it, right? Whatever, right? Let's just say, just bear with me for a second. So let's say that they understand that. And let's say they understand that that's in every life force, that everything has that. What if one day you're going to say, oh man, why did he say this? Now I'm going to be upset. But what if we can prove in the future that every animal has a spirit, has a soul?
I think it's fantastic.
You think it's fantastic, and you go, I know my dog loved me, and I know that he really had a spirit, right? Well, I'm going to tell you right now. Mary knows what I'm going to tell you. What about every cow and chicken and pig you ever ate? No, I just sit with that. Just sit with that, because if that is the case, then you're going to sit. I'm just throwing that out because I just had that thought about it. It's like I sat there and go, oh my gosh, because I wasn't always a vegetarian, and I think to myself, oh my gosh, that was like I'm a horrible person, but that could happen one day, and so like we don't know what people will know in the future. It's hard to know how weird it will be, when they end up knowing, what they end up showing, and maybe they'll just. Like that's one of my fears is we'll turn out to be even stupider than we think we are. I'm pretty sure that there's a lot we don't know, but I don't even know what we don't know. That's the thing. So again, just put that out there that like what if there's something like that one day? I don't know. That's just one. That's one I can imagine. Maybe I'm wrong. Like I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong about that.
We aren't wrong.
I don't know. I'm just telling you, it's possible.
No one knows. It's just that hopefully you aren't wrong, and hopefully there'll be more, there'll be more to learn.
Yeah. I mean, I do hope that there's more to learn. I hope we're not at the top right now.
I don't think we are.
Yep.
I just don't feel we are.
No. So there we go. So you think about it, what we don't know, and we'll see where your mind goes with that.
People say, there's people who live on other planets.
Uh-huh.
We don't know about it yet,
Mhm.
but they're a lot smarter than us, they think.
Yeah. Well, I always loved, on Star Trek, whenever they would talk, whenever Bones, the doctor, would say, can you believe they used to cut people open and, be like, oh yeah, but it was kind of funny because it was Gene Roddenberry's and the writers' attempts to try to say, yeah, people in the future are going to look back at our stuff. Cause we look back on, the bloodletting and the whatever they called it, they would crack open people's heads, to allow pressure to release from their skulls. People, no, but I mean, now we would say, oh, that's horrible. But yeah, the point that Bones was making is they'll look at us in the future. I know.
How they operate, and now how they operate. And I
Yeah.
mean, let's face it, they glue people together in some situations. They use glue instead of stitches.
Bitches, I know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's fair to say that medicine will probably continue to progress. But I always loved that how they did that on Star Trek because they realized they realized that we've come a long way, and we've come a long way even from the 60s when they did that. But yeah, they realized that when we look back on medicine 150, 200 years ago, that we've come a long way and that we're hopefully going to continue to advance. Anyways, it's easy when it comes to those kind of things, but
Dentistry too. Look how far dentistry is.
so much.
Really.
Yep.
All the cosmetic surgery and doing everything else,
Yep. All right. Now we get back to one that we just read before. If any person turns to ghosts and familiar spirits and goes astray after them, I will set my face against that person whom I will cut off from among the people. So, yeah, there's again this ghosts and familiar spirits. Same words, avot, ovot, and you don't need these things. And again, right there, it's pretty clear. Goes astray after them, right? If they follow after them, you shall sanctify yourselves and be holy. And again, this is this word kadosh. Be kadosh. V'yitem kadoshim ki ani Adonai Elohechem. Be holy because I your God. I'm your God. Right. So be holy. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy. And then again, these words: you shall faithfully observe my laws. I Adonai make you holy. Which again is kind of what we read here. At the end here, you shall faithfully observe my laws, right? So there you have that, and also connected with this idea of being holy, kadosh. And we read before about showing deference to the old, to the elderly, to those aged. This one's even stricter. If anyone insults either their father or their mother, that person shall be put to death. That person has insulted father and mother and retains the blood guilt. Wow. So that's a pretty strong addendum to honoring your father and mother, because this is a little different. It's along the same lines, but this one goes a little bit further, right? Because
I take back everything I said.
why? But to your parents?
I'm joking.
Okay, no, but in all fairness, in all fairness, what of course this is doing is it's not saying you're put to death because you didn't do what your mom and dad said. That's not what this says. It doesn't say you didn't honor your father and mother. And of course, we read in Leviticus a few weeks ago, right? It says, fear your father or fear your mother and your father. It reverses them. Here it's father and mother, but it is here specifically insulting them, which is actually an active work against them, an active verb against them, which is not just sitting back and not showing them the proper honor or the proper fear, but to actually work against them, to insult them. Now somebody's going to say, well, I insult. Yeah, cursed. Yeah, the word yikalel, which is translated as insulting, I think is actually probably better translated as cursed. It's definitely actively doing something against them. That's why it's not passive. It's not honoring them. It's not an issue of just honoring and revering, but here actively doing something against them to hurt them. Cursing obviously seems even stronger than insulting, which again pushes it to not just insulting them, but actually doing something by cursing them, which would essentially, by cursing them, you're actually invoking some kind of, again, God's word against them or God's power against them. You know, I curse my parents. That is probably, again, a better translation of the word yikalel, which is the opposite of blessing them. Cursing them is an active way of either wishing them harm or trying to bring about their destruction.
What we don't have in the Torah, maybe you didn't need it back then, is the opposite, where they have to honor their children too. Take care of their children, and in today's day and age, you need that.
No, one can make the argument that not killing them is part of that. We just read that, but yes,
No, I'm not going that far.
Yeah,
I'm just saying,
I know.
You see how.
No,
treating their children.
there is no question that the Torah is missing. I think Mike's point here, as far as like where we would go to understand the role that a parent has in building up their child's self-esteem and has certain basic obligations to, provide some sense of safety for their child. We don't have that in the Torah. There isn't,
I'm
make sure
assuming you need that.
make sure your child is in a safe, supportive environment. Look, part of it today is that obviously we understand that parents have an important role to play in their lives, but it's almost like we had to come back to that. It's almost like somebody had to remind parents that no, you have a huge,
At states, we have laws against that.
yeah, but we've now come around to the understanding that, yeah, parents really do have an important role to play in their children's lives, because, we went into a weird hole of, well, let's face it. And again, we were not kibbutzim where, the parents didn't raise the kids at all, but there was this understanding that kids would go to school and somehow that's how they would be raised, that they would spend their time in school and that would somehow give them the understanding of like who they were as people. And so we said that that's what we were going to do. But yeah, for most of human history, people didn't go to school. And so their childhood was not spent in a completely different environment than their home. So once people were no longer in their home, we had to kind of come back to, well, yeah, isn't there a home component to these people are? So, look, for most of our grandparents, or at least our parents, went to school. And so they had an environment that was different from where their grandparents or great grandparents were before we had schools. I mean, in the 1800s, you didn't go to school. And so you didn't have the question of, well, what role does a parent have? Parents had a huge role in their children's lives. And probably, again, it's hard for us, if we've never experienced it, to understand what that was like. If you were sitting by your mom every day, sitting by her in the kitchen or wherever she was, in the fields, wherever she was, or being around your dad in the fields or at his work or wherever he was, we were with our parents all the time. So yeah, I mean, maybe it didn't have to be spelled out, but there definitely was abuse in the old world. People didn't just wake up one day and find that child abuse was a thing. But yeah, the Torah doesn't really talk about that. And that is, I do think that that's something that's missing from the Torah. There are things that are missing from the Torah. I think Mike's point is a valid one, which is you'd think that it would have to be in the Torah, but I think that the Torah is the beginning of wisdom. It's not the end of wisdom. I mean, if we come to things and say, look, if we understand, I don't want to get into woke culture right now and the arguments about it, but there's parts of it that are true. I mean, there's parts of it you can minimize woke culture, but the reality is that we understand that there are people who are born with certain identities which the Torah doesn't really seem to understand. Talmud does. The Talmud has 6 different gender identities. The Torah doesn't, but the Talmud absolutely has 6 different gender identities. So there are places in Jewish tradition where we get it from, where we can get this from. There are parts of the Talmud which talk about, parenting styles to some extent. Some of them are still seem pretty strict, but the reality is that there are things in the Talmud that deal with, how parents, what kinds of things parents should do for their kids and what the obligations are for parents. I mean, the Torah doesn't say that parents are obligated to provide an education for their kids. The Talmud does. And what that education, by the way, isn't that, of course, that they go to school for 6 hours a day. They didn't have it, but they do have to provide them with basic literacy, which is something that the ancient world didn't have for the most part. Didn't have until there was mandatory schools. So there were basic literacies that every Jew was supposed to have. But also one of the things the Talmud says is the parent has to teach their child a career, has to give them the ability to have a career. Seems like a no-brainer today. And nowadays we'd say, hey, that's what you get from going to college, or that's what you get from trade school, or that's what you get from, providing your child with the ability to go to community college or whatever it is for them to learn a skill. But that parents, the Talmud says that a parent has to teach their children certain things. They have to teach them how to read. They have to teach them a skill. And the other thing you have to teach them, how to swim. The Talmud says a parent has to teach their kid how to swim. Now, some people have questioned, is that literal? Is it really how to swim? Like, does every kid have? Now, the Talmud says that, but other people have understood this to be that parents have to teach their kids coping skills. That swimming actually refers to survival skills, whatever that means. Survival in society, survival in life, that parents have an obligation to teach their kids, basic literacy, basic, job security, and also survival skills. So yeah, the Talmud talks about it, but you're right. I mean, the Torah seems a little empty on that, and you wish there was something in the Torah, but there is stuff in the Talmud, and there is stuff throughout Jewish history, and other, throughout Jewish writings beyond that help us understand what those responsibilities are. But yeah, the basic ones are don't kill your kid, don't sacrifice your kid to another god, and don't insult your parents, don't curse them. There's basic rules to stop our society from going off the rails. But yeah, one could argue that there's other stuff that isn't spelled out. But again, the Torah doesn't have to spell out everything. There's 613 commandments in the Bible, according to tradition, but in the Torah, but that's not the end of the laws, right? The Talmud has thousands more, and life tells us that there's thousands more. Let's read a little bit more. And I'm trying to get to a certain place and want to end there, but I may or may not. We may get there. I'm not in a rush. If a man commits adultery with a married woman, committing adultery with another man's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. Now, you all know that from the Ten Commandments. Don't commit adultery. There's no punishment in the Ten Commandments. There is here. The punishment spelled out. There's a whole list of things you're not supposed to do sexually that we read about in Achrei Mot. We read about prohibited relationships. Here you get, and here's the problem. So a couple chapters ago, we read this in Achrei Mot. Now it actually says there's a punishment for these. If a man lies with his father's wife, it is the nakedness of the father that he has uncovered. The two shall be put to death, and they retain the blood guilt. That same kind of phrase that we're going to have here. If a man lies with a daughter-in-law, both of them shall be put to death. They have committed incest, and they retain the blood guilt. So that's not his daughter, but his daughter-in-law. Again, they retain the blood guilt. If a man lies with a man as one lies with a woman, the two of them have done an abhorrent thing, they shall be put to death, and they retain the blood guilt. So this is the line where I said we were going to get to today, which we did, which is we read earlier, a couple chapters ago, about homosexuality. So we read the line that basically says, let's just go back real quick. Let me just see here. No, Rashi doesn't help us a lot there, other than the fact that he says that it's actual sexual intercourse. But let's look at the previous chapter. Oh, I could have just done it that way. That was a little silly. Oh, the wrong way. Here it is. Do not lie with a man, with a male as one lies with a woman. It is an abhorrence. Now, by the way, here's the molech there too. Right? So here we have similar laws, except now we have the punishment. So there's 1822, and then there's there is 2013. So there's the two lines. So in the context of where it is, you've got incest, more incest. If a man takes a woman and her mother into his household as his wives, it is depravity. Both he and they shall be put to the fire. There be no depravity with you. If a man has carnal relations with a beast, he shall be put to death, and you shall kill the beast. If a woman approaches any beast to mate with it, you shall kill the woman and the beast. They shall be put to death, and they retain the blood guilt. So there you have bestiality, incest, and homosexuality all together. Okay? Except here again, the punishment is death. So this is where, again, people get like, what's going on here? How do we possibly understand these texts in line with the views and the values that we have in today's society, with the understanding of what's going on here? Look, I mentioned before that there are homosexuals who live Orthodox lives who understand these texts in ways that allow them to live their lives authentically and not feel like they're violating the Torah. Most people understand these laws in the context of a biblical society where men had to procreate, families had to procreate in order for society to regenerate and for it to continue. And these type of rules are there to protect society so that it doesn't go off the rails. Most importantly, as we said before, all of these are in connection and conjunction with the understanding that you do not behave like the Canaanites who lived there already. The Canaanites practicing homosexuality would have been seen as people who were not who were living in an environment that the Israelites did not want to be like. So it's been argued, and I think it's fair to imagine, that homosexuality is part and parcel of a society that you're rejecting. They rejected it and felt that they were doing God's work in doing it. So if homosexuality is there with the witchcraft and is there with the offering your child up to the other gods and all these other things, that we felt that it was part of a Canaanite lifestyle, gashing your bodies, that people said, this is not the way we're supposed to live. Does that help somebody who's a modern Orthodox Jew? No, because it doesn't really matter why the Torah says it, it says it. So how do you come to terms with it? You come to terms with it in this way, which is not that different than the way the rabbis interpreted the Torah 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, when they began to write the Mishnah and the Talmud, which is that there's ways of understanding this which are not literal, in the sense that there must be, again, an understanding of it where you read it in a way that you can live and understand who you are with these rules. So that being said, how do you understand it? Because and again, it's a rationalization, and you're going to say this is stupid, but I can point to you many times where the Talmud comes up with solutions where you can say, well, that's kind of not really what the intention of the law is. People will say, if they lie with a man in a homosexual relationship, a homosexual sexual relationship, they're not lying with a man like a woman. They're lying with a man like a man. And they understand that to be a relationship where the person is not a man. I mean, they're a man lying with another man. They're not lying with a man as one lies with a woman. Now, again, I don't want to say splitting hairs, but is that a silly way of reading the text? Not along the lines of the way other people have read the text for thousands of years, which is, there might be another understanding of this, which is, again, read it this way. Read it so that you understand that, yeah. And I've talked to religious Jews who are gay who will say, that's the way I understand it. I don't lie with my husband, my partner, the way I lie with a woman. And that's from people who used to be married to women. So I don't know what to tell you other than these are problematic lines. For people who are not Jewish, for people who want to invoke the Bible and say that this is the line of the Bible that they want to invoke, I have no patience for that. I have no tolerance for it. And unless they're following all the other laws of the Torah or trying to follow the other laws of the Torah, don't invoke this one line. If you're not keeping Shabbos, or you're not even trying to keep Shabbos, you're not even trying to keep kosher, don't decide that this is where the one line you want to decide to keep, that this line of the Torah is the important line. I just have no patience for that. So yeah, there are people who decided that this is the only line of Torah that they're interested in keeping and enforcing. So
Don't you think that nowadays homosexuality, both sides, is more prevalent than ever, or spoke about in public more so than ever? And do you feel that it will ever go back to the other way?
I think that I think that there's a possibility that there'll be, yes, what do you mean possibility? It's happening. We're already seeing people react to homosexuality in a super negative way. And yeah, we are seeing it. We're seeing a level of homophobia and anger towards homosexuality in a way that would frighten me. But on the other hand, you know, I'd also say, yeah, but it kind of goes hand in hand with cultural acceptance, and that you're going to have people fight back against it. But look, I can only tell you this, Joanne, the statistics when the Pew Research polls and the other polls that go on that are studying people from asking questions about their religious affiliation, what we're finding is that the children of the very evangelical folks who are oftentimes the most anti-gay, their kids don't feel that way. So the cultural position overall of another generation is that they don't have patience for it either. So I think the trend is such that it's not there. I don't think there'll be a swing back on the pendulum, because I think it's already, people understand that, like, it just makes sense that people should be not marginalized for loving the people who they feel that they have to love in a healthy and a nurturing way. I think most people understand that today. So look, you know, there are still people who get uncomfortable seeing black and white people being married to each other. It's become, you know, more and more accepted, and most people today would say that's just nuts. But there are still people who feel that way, and it'll probably take another generation or so before. But I don't think that, you know, I could be wrong, but I don't. Look, it's always going to be problematic because it's in the Bible, right? So there'll always be people who point to the Bible. But I've said this before in forums where there have been evangelical Christians. We had a debate back when we were debating Prop 8 here in California, where I openly said to a full room here in Santa Clarita, packed of people for and against this issue when we were debating it in California, whether to allow marriage. And remember, California passed Prop 8, and then it went to the courts and they found it to be illegal. I said to a mixed group of people in a church, and it was right around high holidays. I said, I apologize to gay and lesbian people here who've had the Bible, who have had the Bible, have been beaten up by the Bible because of who they are. Because there are people here in this room, you know, and I didn't call them out as evangelical fundamentalist Christians, but there are people who have beaten them up with our Bible, with my Bible, and they have no understanding of the rest of the Bible, and they've decided to pick this law to beat them up over. And like I said, I have no tolerance for that. If you are trying to follow the Bible, and if you're trying to live by the Torah, and this text causes you pain because you're following the rest of the Torah, I get it, and I have a lot of sympathy for people who are wrestling with that. But if this is the only law you want to keep, I don't want to hear about it. Honestly, I have very little tolerance for it, and I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to engage with you, because it's just ridiculous. You don't pick out one law of the Torah that you want to keep, and this one, of all the laws, is the law you want to keep. So with that being said, this is an example of when the Torah comes into direct conflict, or we have to figure out how we understand the Torah by the world that we live in today. I don't know what the answer is, other than, again, for most of us, there are ways of understanding the Torah that will help us live meaningfully by it without being in conflict. So this is one of those examples where we have to wrap our heads around it, and we have to think about it. And with that, we'll come back next week to finish up these rules. I do want to point out one thing, because we did talk about it. We did throw out this issue of vegetarianism and animals today. The question that Rashi asks, and I think it's a fair question to ask, and you can go out with this question, because I don't have an answer for it. I'll just tell you what Rashi says. Oh, that's not the answer. That's not the one I'm looking for. It's this one right here. Why do you kill the animal? The animal didn't do anything. Why the animal? Why the poor animal gets killed? And again, his answer is, you got to destroy the things that are making people follow sin, including in some cases trees. Why? Because some trees were worshipped as idols, right? People would worship under the trees, and you cut those poor trees down. Tree didn't do anything. I didn't ask these people to worship me, but sometimes we have to destroy the things that are causing us to sin. No, I didn't worship it. I tried to protect it. I tried to keep it alive. It's a little different. I didn't worship it. All right, folks, we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice. Bye-bye. Bye.